Hi, this is Jug Gerard, the creator of iAnalyze Racing, and today we're going to cover a few things that we haven't covered yet. We've got a couple of interesting tabs that need some discussion. We're going to look at the gearing tab, then we're going to look at the ride heights tab, the lap report tab, and the fuel report tab. All of these are a little bit interesting. They all provide different things, and the gearing tab provides a way to look at to see if you're geared properly compared to, or at least how you're geared relative to another race car. You can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. Ride heights provide ride height information, and the lap report breaks down your lap or the laps that you've run into the various sectors, and it also combines it with the sectors of everyone else to try and figure out what is really the best time that can be done on this racetrack, and give an idea of what that looks like. And finally, there's the fuel report, and the fuel report gives you a way to look at how you're consuming fuel and allows you to modify your strategy and perhaps how you're driving, to either save fuel or use more, or what have you during the race. And there's lots of different ways for you to configure it to have it help you pick your race strategy or your pit strategy. So, of course, as always, one of the first things that you need when you want to get started with iAnalyze Racing is you need data. So we'll grab a data set here from Spa with the Star Mazda that I ran, and you can see how terrible a driver I actually am. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the gearing page. Now we're going to go to the gearing page, and to start, we just want to take a look at the data lap, which right now the data lap is my most recent lap. We're going to change it over to my fastest lap, which really isn't very fast, and we can take a look at what that actually means on the gearing tab. So jumping back to the gearing tab, you can see that this tries to provide a gear chart and provides the lines of what the individual gears are. And if we look at it, we can see that its second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth gear are represented. One of the things that I like to do for all the signals and anywhere in iAnalyze Racing is that I try to make all the signals the same color, but to help differentiate between data signals and reference signals, signals from the reference source or from the data source, I try to make them different shades of the same color. So, for example, here, uh, data 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 source colors I try to make brighter because those are usually the ones I'm really interested in. And reference source colors I try to make a little bit darker. And you can see, so we have light green, light red, light purple, dark purple, whatever color that is. Um, and you can see, and we can use that to identify what's here. So you can see we have sixth, fifth, fourth, third, and second gear. Now, on the gearing page, because we don't really have shift charts and gear charts for the individual race cars, and with the different rear end gears, we don't really know where we should be shifting and such. And so what I've tried to do is write a little algorithm that goes and picks out all the data, and I think it typically just looks for 100% throttle, and you're not turning into a corner and don't have too much lateral G. And it tries to take that data and then, based on what gear you're in when you're doing this, generate what a shift chart looks like, and plot it versus with the RPM on the y-axis and speed on the x-axis. And this can give you an idea of essentially what you're looking for. Now, it's not exactly perfect. I mean, in an ideal shift chart, what you would see is you'd run the gear up and say you'd go to 70 miles an hour, then you'd shift into third gear in this case, and then it would go up, and you wouldn't have this overlapping that you see here, of the gears. But that's because of it's picking the data out from different spots in the track, and I'm maybe in a gear for too long or too short, and essentially maybe overlapping how we're looking at things. So at any rate, but this gives you an idea of what a gear chart for what you have selected potentially looks like. And of course, it's also affected by things like your aerodynamics, what your setups is, etc. And it kind of has a couple of things you can do. You can either look at it versus the least squares fit, which kind of takes all of the data that we're able to pull out and fits a best line that kind of goes down the middle of the data. Or you can look at the actual data, and you can see there's a very slight change here, but you can see that the line isn't straight, especially if you look at the red third gear line. You can see it bounces up and down a little bit. I like just looking at the least squares fit line. That's typically what you'd see in a regular gear chart anyway, or a shift chart. You'd see straight lines anyway. So might as well just look close enough and get an idea here. And you can kind of get an idea while it doesn't give you the gear ratio, it does kind of give you an idea what your gears actually were. Now, one thing you can do that's actually kind of nice is you can, for example, um, pick another driver, and that'll jump to his best lap here for the reference lap. We can go back to the gearing, and now we will show the reference lap here, and you can say, hey, there's something going on here. There's a few things that are different. First off, he's using first gear. I never used first gear, but he's using first gear somewhere on the race course. And if you look at the individual lines themselves, you can see the reference lines are for him are at slightly different slopes than what we were using, except for perhaps in fifth gear and sixth gear here. Also, he's able to get to a much higher speed in sixth gear than I was able to, and so this kind of tells us that there's some gearing differences. Now you have to be really careful with this page because you can jump to conclusions that aren't necessarily the case. But it's at least a good indicator of, hey, your gearing is different. What I typically look for first off is shifts in speed as to where the gears are actually existing, and I think that we're pretty close in speed and in gear choice right up until about sixth gear. Although he does have, because the next thing you look at is the slope of the gears relative to each other. So if we're looking at the third gear here, or second gear, I'm sorry, which is the green lines here, from about, it looks 50 miles an hour to about 80 here, you can see there's a slight slope difference. And that may mean that there's just a little bit of a gear change one to the other. And then you can kind of see that as you walk through each of the next successive four gears. Then it seems in the fifth gear we're about the same thing, but he's carrying more speed than I am. And then finally in the sixth gear, you can tell that this darker bluish line, he's carrying a lot more speed than I am, and he's able to get more RPM out of the motor. And this may in fact just be a result of the driving, but it could also be he's got a different gear there. But at least it gives you an idea, a picture of what's going on. If you are racing and you see significantly different slope changes between the gears, you know they've changed the gear on you. The separation here is another indication of that the gearing may be affected in one way or another. So anyway, that's kind of the gear page in a nutshell. It's a kind of unique thing. It's a little bit it's a very rough tool, but certainly one that's worth looking at, because if you're getting walked by on the straights and you just can't figure out why, because you've taken all the downforce out of the thing, maybe you're in the wrong gears. Maybe you've got the car gearing. Like for example, maybe using first gear really helps, and having a tall first gear able to loosen up the gears all the way down, especially at a track like Spa, because if you can see it's got a lot of straightaways, a lot of tight stuff as well. So perhaps using more of the available gear range is a good thing. Okay, so next thing that we're going to look at is the Ride Heights tab. And in the Ride Heights tab, basically it does exactly what it says. It pulls off the ride heights from the data, so you can look at the height that the car's actually running at from the from the telemetry data. Now, in order to get ride height data, you have to use telemetry mode known as dual mode. And in fact, the newest pre-release version, if you put it in anything else but dual mode, you'll get a little blue warning icon up here that says, hey, just remember you've got to be in dual mode to collect this data. iRacing telemetry data does in fact have the ride height and wheel speed and other data in it, and that data isn't shared in the global telemetry feed from iRacing. Mostly because if you had it, you could probably write yourself a couple of quick programs to be able to have the computer drive for you and implement anti-lock braking and other fun things. So things like tire temperatures, wheel speeds, and ride heights aren't available to the general public. But it is available in the iRacing session, in the iRacing telemetry data, and that's exactly what dual mode allows you to do. Typically, iAnalyze Racing defaults to classic mode, and in classic mode, that's just the live data feed that comes out of iRacing. You don't get all the other channels. That's kind of the default because it helps save space and saves memory in the computer, and that's also a good thing to be looking at because we don't know what your computer is when we're looking at it. So if you've got a fairly beefy little computer, changing it over to dual mode is where you want to be in order to get the ride heights, wheel speeds, and such. Um, and once you have it, you'll be able to take a look at the individual ride heights that are available for the corner. And you can see the top plot is the left front, and here it is over on the left front where you expect the left front to be. And as you mouse the cursor along here, and you could also cursor along as well, although that's a little slower. And you can see that it changes as it goes along, and it updates the values as well. And for each corner, it tells you what the min and max of the individual corners actually are going to be. And you can watch and see, look for things like curb strikes, like right here. I bet you I hit a curb right here. And in other spots, you can see some of the effects of, for example, coming into En Rouge, which is right here. You can see the back ends really getting lowered down and pushed down. It's going to be kind of curious to try to figure out what's happening there, and should I actually be raising the back end so that that doesn't happen, and I don't drag the back of the car right in through here. And the question is, am I dragging the back of the car or not? It just gives you something to look at. And so that's the ride heights page. You can show both the data stuff, the data source laps, or for example, if we were to pick another one of my laps as a comparison, we'll pick my most recent slow lap one, there, and then we'll go to the ride heights tab, and you can see that you can then display one to the other, and it does get a little bit busy. Now, one thing that's missing here is this is a CFS ride height. That stands for center front splitter ride height, and that's really important on ovals and with stock cars. And you'll also see it in a number of other cars. That's not provided for the Star Mazda, so this center section is empty, and you don't get the plot over here because there's no signals for it. And you can see that once you have a reference displayed, you can see that as you mouse along at the different positions on the track, the bar graphs update with the data for the reference and the data source laps as well. So as you scroll through, and of course the map has the sectors called out. So if you mouse over, you can look at sector info just to see where the times are and such. And it gives you a pretty good idea of what's going on. And so, for example, in here, you can kind of see, while I may have hit a curb here, I didn't do it on the darker line that's flat here. But guess what? The reference lap was slower, so I think whatever I did there was probably a good thing. Well, and that brings us to our next report, to our first of the report tabs. Now, both the lap and the fuel report only refer to the data source session. And the reason for this is that there'd be just way too much data for us to break down easily to have it make sense. And so what it does, well, on the lap report, this just takes a look at every lap run by every single driver and kind of puts it together in a tabular format. First, up here in the header, it has a whole bunch of information, the conditions, the track, the configuration, the time it was run, and how long of practice it was. It has over here on the left-hand side, it has the track. And as you mouse over sections, you can see it highlights the sections, so you can take a look at where that bit of time was actually being measured. Now, the ideal sector times, this section looks at the fastest sector times for every single driver. Selects the fastest one that it can find, and you can see it tells you who the driver is, what the speed for that sector was, what lap they set it on, what their car number they're on, and you can see that it does that for all of these, and it sums all those together to come up with a ideal lap time. Now, the ideal lap time may not actually be possible, because if you have a number of lines that are conflicting, one requires you to be to the middle of the track, and the start of the next sector requires you to be to the far right side of the track, well, you're not going to be able to do that. But it still gives you an idea of what the ultimate goal you can actually get. And in fact, if we look at the ideal lap from all the drivers, we can see that the fastest lap that a single driver set is actually 0.12 seconds shorter, or still behind by 0.12 seconds. Now, in the next part of the report is the driver report, and you can go and you can pick over here any one of the drivers, and it will highlight the laps that they've run and what their laps were actually, and which sectors were actually fastest. And as you can see, as you go over, you can mouse, and the sector highlights up in the track, and you can see which is fastest, and it'll actually show you the fastest lap and highlight that. So, my ideal sector time So a 223, 168, 7 seconds off. That's horrible. But if we look down here, I'm actually, you know, there's enough variability in my driving that if we take my best sectors, that I'm 0.62 seconds off. My best lap is 0.62 seconds off from my ideal lap, and so it just kind of breaks things down, easy to look at. You can when you have multiple sessions in one iRacing race, it will say practice. If there's qualifying, show you qualify. It'll show the race, and so those will be separate. And then it will have the drivers listed all down here on the left-hand side, and you can flip through the individual drivers to see what their fast lap actually was and break down what their ideal time was. And you can see that this gentleman set the fastest lap of the time with a 2:16.906, and you can tell that this one sector here, he's a little bit faster in that for whatever reason, and that actually bumped his time down a little bit. And he's still not as fast as what is his ideal lap. Isn't as what the overall of all the composite of all the drivers actually is. This is a good way to identify what sections of track you need to concentrate on. Especially on a track as big as Spa. As you go through it, you can say, well, geez, I'm really quick here. I'm quick here. Where am I the slowest? Let's see, and you can figure out what's the slowest one. You think, or where you see the biggest gap between your laps, and you can pick that section to actually take a look at and concentrate on. Well, what setup change might work here, or more importantly, using the rest of the iAnalyze Racing to figure out, hey, how can I improve my driving to get around the track faster? Which brings us to the fuel report. And so that's the lap report. I'm sorry, and that's the lap report. Kind of summarizes what you can do with the lap report, and that lets us move on to our final tab today, and that's the fuel report. And the fuel report is a pretty interesting thing. And if you do any laps or any races with pit stops, you're going to be interested in taking a look at the lap report. Now, what the lap report does is that it goes through, and as you establish laps, and it will report the laps that it uses to calculate numbers here in the fastest laps, all laps, and slowest laps. So as you're analyzing data and opening different data sources, it will take that data and display it here and kind of show you how it got to these average, median, average range, medium range, and it breaks down the different statistics that it uses to help break things down. When you are actually in a race and you have iAnalyze Racing open, the aggressive, standard, and conservative laps will show you the remaining laps of fuel that you have in the tank, given the driving or given the mathematical strategy you assign for what an aggressive strategy would look like, a standard strategy would look like, and a conservative strategy would look like. And this is all done using basic statistics. Basically, the average is just the average everybody is familiar with. The median is the value that is 50%. Is the value at which 50% of the values are above and 50% of the values are below, and that's different than the average, which is the average of all the values. And we also use the standard deviation, and it shows you what that standard deviation is based on what strategy you have selected. And that standard deviation is what is the average distance from the average of each sample. And so it gives you an idea of how far from normal is that particular sample. And it lets you just pick a range as well of 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, or 3 standard deviations. If you're a management folks and you've heard management individual and you've heard Six Sigma stuff, that's what this is talking about. And it calculates out, well, geez, what would the range be based on if you were with plus or minus 1 standard deviation of all the signals plus or within 1 standard deviation of all the samples within 2 standard deviations, what would the range be? And here there's not a lot of data here, so you don't get a lot of variability. And in this page is where you get to pick it out. That you can pick out the different strategies. So the strategy statistic that you're looking for in the aggressive strategy, I use what would be if I drove as hard as I could and used as much fuel as I could. What would that actually mean? And how do you pick that out? Well, what this is saying is it's going to use the fastest mean, and it's going to pick out the mean of all the lap time. So it's going to take the average of the fastest laps, and it used the lap time to determine those averages, and it's going to say how many aggressive laps to show. It's going to use 7 laps to figure out what that mean is in order to figure out how the actual report works. The standard strategy here, I have it selected to use all the laps, and again based on lap time. You have a lot of choices. You can say all laps, and the median of all those laps, the fastest mean, the fastest median, slowest mean, slowest medium, and within the standard deviations as well. So you can pick a number of different strategies, and you have that option within all of the individual strategies, and you can pick, whether you want to pick it on lap time or fuel usage. That's the other thing. If you want to sort your laps based on how much fuel you've used versus than instead on laps times, that may give you a slightly different answer, and it may mean a difference in the number that it calculates. It gives you a lot of different ways to play with things and a lot of different ways to look at stuff. And on the conservative strategy, you have the same basic idea. You can pick strategies from there. And that's the fuel report. The nice thing is, in each one of these, if you have an extra screen, if you have a 4th screen or a 5th screen, you can pop this out. This little button here, by the way, will pop out an individual tab into its own window, and you can move that wherever you like off into any other window, and it can even occupy the whole window. So if you have a whole another monitor, you can pop it out and you can show that, and it will show the highlighted areas on that screen. And of course, you can always, if you close it, it'll pop it right back into the tab here in the main window. Well, and that is the gearing, ride height, lap report, and fuel report tabs. I hope it was informative. If you have questions, please, as always, get in touch with me either on the support page or by sending me an email to Douglas@jackalopetechnologies.com. Always looking forward to hearing from folks. I want to make this the best tool we possibly can, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I think there's a lot of information here, and if we can help make everybody faster drivers, that would be a great thing. Anyway, thanks for your time. Appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.